All right, so new fallout. Care to weigh in, Steve Cortes?
Well, I have to say, this is the political version of, for me at least, of my parents are fighting, because I have so much admiration for both of them, for the president and for Steve Bannon. Clearly, the president is the leader of this movement, the leader of our country. But Steve Bannon, I think, was also indispensable in the campaign, and I admire him very much. So I hate to see this. I think it's a distraction we don't need right now. But I will also say this, I think this is important. The left-wing media, I think, right now is trying like crazy to suddenly believe Steve Bannon. 2 days ago, they thought he was a combination of Darth Vader and Goebbels. Okay, now he's this truth teller to them. So I think there's a lot of duplicity with them. I think what matters most, it matters a lot to those of us in the news business and in the political game. Most Americans, I think, are looking at things like their wages rising, their 401ks rising, optimism surging in this country, a fantastic 2017 of achievements in America, controlling the border. To me, these are the issues that regular people care about, not the inside baseball
machinations. So take your pick. It
It
appears Steve is pointing out a lot of mixed messages that we're seeing on this.
Yeah, but I want to push back on you a little bit. I do agree with you that the real issues of the day are all the things that you just lined up. But to try and pin this on the media, I think, doesn't really work, because if you look at the author, he's been accused by some people in the book of making up quotes that were not attributed to them. However, the White House believed that what Steve Bannon said was true, and that's why the White House and the president himself released that statement yesterday, scorching statement about Steve Bannon. So they believe what he said was true, and they reacted to it. So I don't think you can just say that this is the media making
Interesting you should say that. I want to get this in from a Washington Post piece talking about the author, saying, quote, "One thing Michael Wolff has never been described as is boring. A provocateur and media polemicist, Wolff has a penchant for stirring up an argument and pushing the facts as far as they'll go, and sometimes further than they can tolerate, according to his critics. He has been accused of not just recreating scenes in his books and columns, but of creating them wholesale." Marie Harf.
I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about his sourcing. He has talked about it a little bit in some of these pieces. That will be examined more. Apparently, he does have some tapes of some of his interviews. But I think, so we'll see how that plays out. If even a tenth of the quotes are true in this story, though, and Katie's right, the White House believes that Bannon's quotes were accurate, and that's why they're suing him. You don't sue someone for non-disclosure if they're not true, right? You sue if someone actually puts out real information.
You sue for defamation if they're not true.
Exactly. So if only 10% of this book is true or accurate, it is still a disturbing portrait of a White House, particularly in the early days, that was in chaos. We've talked about that a lot before John Kelly came in, and of a president who is quite emotional, quite erratic at times. We see that with his Twitter use. So I think we need to look at the sourcing, and that will be a big conversation over the coming days.
So as the story was breaking yesterday afternoon, one of the things that we realized is that the volume and the speed of responses were kicking in during that 1 p.m. Eastern hour. And I don't know that anybody had really heard as much about Michael Wolff. We certainly had not heard as much from Steve Bannon since that horrendous loss of his candidate in Alabama. And his whole candidacy was a hot mess sandwich, and so that was the person that Steve Bannon chose. So we had not heard even him as much. And then all of a sudden you get, from the White House, you get the comms director for the First Lady, you've got Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, and then all the way up to the president coming on board.
By the way, I just want to be clear about that, the defamation part, because the lawyer in his wording and of his letter does claim defamation. He says your publication of the false, baseless statements about Mr. Trump gives rise to, among other claims, defamation by libel.
But that's different than the Bannon NDA,
by truth,
but
by the way.
That's different than the Bannon NDA. They're claiming he broke a non-disclosure agreement. You can only break a non-disclosure agreement if you tell the truth. You can't break it by saying something false.
But it doesn't matter.
He was not supposed to say anything bad about what him or his family.
It doesn't matter.
But
The answer back for defamation is still truth.
But even outside of the legalities of it, just what's true, right? And I can tell you this from personal experience, a couple of things that are not true that I think are really significant. One is, Wolff claims in his book that the president himself and senior campaign staff not only didn't think that he would not win, but did not want to win. I can't tell you how wrong and how just salacious and what a lie that is.
All right, so an example of something that did apparently, and we can all say is not true, is this. And there is an incident Wolff relates in that book where the president supposedly asks, "Who's that?" at the mention of former House Speaker John Boehner's name. But a quick check of Twitter cast some pretty big doubts on the idea that the president didn't know who John Boehner was, including 6 tweets from over the course of a few years where the president mentions him by name, and you're
Right.
looking at
And
him on the
he
screen.
mentioned him on the campaign trail. He golfed with him. Do you
There are
really
pictures
believe
of
he
them
didn't
together.
know who he
but
was?
the point of my bringing up the fact that you had all of these members from the White House to the president coming on board with this is that's usually something that you see before the book comes out or is even announced.
Absolutely.
So it sort of gives that feel of caught unawares. But once they can't, I mean, did you see the wording of what the president said? I mean, that was a huge, not even a clapback. That was a slapback.
Yeah.
He lost his mind. The only thing that was missing from the Southern girl in me is, ever loving.
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart, right? So, I mean, that sort of response from the White House, that strong worded response from the White House would indicate that, you know what, didn't necessarily know all that was coming down, but they're ready for this.
Right. No, and Harris, I think, too, that's important. And look, let me be clear. As much as I admire Steve Bannon, and I do, Donald Trump is the indispensable man, I believe.
He's also president.
Of this movement and president of the United States. And that's an important point, too. They have very different roles, right? Steve Bannon right now is outside of government. He's
What
an
is
idea
Bannon's
man.
role?
He's a provocateur.
What's his role?
His role is being an idea man to rouse the base. Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief of our country. They're very different roles. They can have the same goals and still disagree a lot.
How do you account for the capitulation today? You heard the president just moments ago. He said, I quote, he called me a great man last night. Oh, we do? Let's watch it. Better than me reading it.
Thank you very much. I don't know, he called me a great man last night, so, he obviously changed his tune pretty quick. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you. I don't talk to him.
I don't talk to him. So what changed Steve Bannon's mind?
Well, I don't think his mind changed. That's my point.
I agree.
He is a great man, Donald Trump. He's an amazing leader. We just finished a momentous year of 2017. Well, two things. Number one, I'm guessing taken at the best, for Michael Wolff, very much out of context. At worst, manufactured, because he certainly has done that in the past. So I don't take those quotes
But Steve
verbatim.
Bannon hasn't refuted it.
You know what? We're just getting this from our producer on Capitol Hill, an off-camera remark from Ivanka Trump at the Capitol. He was able to shoot off a question about the quotes in the book, and she is, of course, on multiple occasions quoted very negatively in this book by Steve Bannon. She responded, I think that the president has made his point of view very clear, and everyone in the White House agrees with him, and smiled on her departure.
Well,
Marie?
what was shocking to me is how much access the White House gave to Michael Wolff. I mean, just as a communications professional, that was shocking, and I think they're probably regretting that today. Even if Wolff took things out of context or pushed the envelope further on quotes, he clearly had access in the West Wing.
And Marie, I agree with you on that. That was clearly a mistake. I don't often criticize the Trump White House. Quite the opposite. But that was a mistake. Giving that level of access to somebody who has his record of salacious gossip-style reporting, clearly a left-winger.
And Sarah Sanders said 95% of the time the meetings inside the White House were with Steve Bannon when he did enter.